Hey, good afternoon. This is Katie at Kentucky Hemp Works. We are back for another lesson of Hemp Homeschool. This is lesson 20, and I'm actually pretty amazed that we made it this far. I was thinking we would just do this for a few weeks till the quarantine was over, but it's 20 lessons so far, and that's amazing, and we're getting some good feedback about them, so I'm enjoying them. I hope you guys are enjoying them too. So this week we have talked mostly about just the spread of cannabis use across the globe and how that started in China is the earliest recorded time, and then it spread throughout Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and then eventually to the United States, and now it's pretty much all over the world. Although some places still have prohibition, I think most places are turning their attention towards removing those prohibitions on cannabis, at least for hemp, and in some cases for marijuana, medical cannabis, even recreational use. So it's really come a long way in the last really the last 20 or 30 years or more in some cases. So yesterday we talked about how it came to the United States and how it spread across the country, started in the eastern states with the colonists, and then as our civilization moved west, they brought cannabis with them. So it is, I guess, a nice coincidence that the western states were really the first ones to legalize cannabis after prohibition in the United States. So we talked yesterday a little bit about the prohibition and how the government used fear tactics to scare people and to make them think that cannabis was this terrible thing. Of course, that was being grown for the war effort. So, one day we had farmers growing cannabis, hemp for the war effort, and then the next day they were illegal and they needed to have a tax stamp and all this other stuff that went on. So really for the next 80 years, there was, pretty much solid prohibition on hemp being grown in the United States. Now, back in the 70s, Oregon, I believe, I don't remember which year, but I know it was in the 70s, Oregon decriminalized cannabis. So they were really the first ones to do that. And then 20 years later, then California legalized medical marijuana, and then a lot of other states followed. So you saw Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico really started on the western half of the United States, and then sort of started spreading its way to the east as well. So now, more recently, as far as marijuana goes, there's a lot of states that have legalized marijuana for different uses. But the issue of hemp has always been very separate from marijuana. So even though Oregon decriminalized it, and even though California legalized medical marijuana, there still wasn't really any attention being shown to industrial hemp and some of the uses, some of the many uses beyond cannabinoids. So with I want to focus a little bit on Kentucky, and the reason is that here we were the first really to push the issue of industrial hemp as a separate issue from marijuana and to successfully legalize it. And what I had thought was interesting back then, we're talking about back in 2007, 2008, when I really started becoming interested in this topic, what surprised me the most was that there was so much acceptance all over the country, maybe not in Kentucky, but there was acceptance for the use of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, but we still weren't growing hemp. We couldn't make t-shirts from U.S. grown hemp. We couldn't eat the seeds unless we imported it from another country. So we had a real strong disconnect in the application of our cannabis laws in this country, where in some cases it's okay, it's fine if you use this, it's okay to sell it, but in other cases, even animal feed and fiber and ropes and things like that, it was banned. No good, no bueno, can't do that. So it was definitely a major disconnect, and it caused it caused people to do what I call this focus in on cannabinoids, and then, you know, missing the forest for the trees. So I often say that THC and CBD are a very small part of a very big picture. And that big picture is all of the uses of cannabis. You know, I've never been one to say, well, we should legalize this type and we should not legalize that type. I really believe that if we approached it from that broad perspective of all the things that you can do with it, all the food products, the plastics, the you know, using it in batteries, there's so much that you can do with it, but we're focusing so intently, our markets are focusing so intently on THC and CBD because it's more profitable that way. It's more profitable to grow an acre of hemp for cannabinoid production than it is for fiber production. So I think that this hemp process has a long way to go in order for hemp to become a commodity crop. But at the same time, I'm really excited to see how much interest there has been in products and manufacturing products outside of cannabinoid production. So, I mean, we've seen some really incredible things just out of our shop alone. We've got, you know, people, Meatloaf's Kitchen, making gourmet dog treats, beautiful gourmet dog treats with high protein levels out of hemp protein and oil. The soap manufacturers, the body care manufacturers. There's moonshine and bourbon being made from hemp seeds, which is pretty exciting, and definitely something that's probably, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a hemp bourbon before. But how did we get there? How did we get from cannabis being prohibited to all of a sudden we're making all these products out of Kentucky grown hemp, you know, domestic, U.S. grown, Kentucky proud hemp, and we're so excited about that. But how did we get there? So in the last 20 years here in Kentucky, I mentioned some of the pioneers in the industry like Gatewood Galbraith and Craig Lee, even cameos from Woody Harrelson and Willie Nelson. But we had this sort of core network of pioneers in the industry who were spreading the word and educating people. And back in 2001, they managed to work with the legislature and get a bill passed that would create a commission called the Kentucky Industrial Hemp Commission. And that hemp commission was a state board that would, the point of the board and the responsibility of the board was to oversee the creation of a hemp program in Kentucky. The other goals of the board were education and working on legislation and advising legislators and you know, getting out and spreading the word about it. But what really ended up happening was once that board was created back in 2001, it never really did anything. The board had one meeting. They got the minutes. They filed those minutes with the state, but that was it. You know, it just kind of sat dormant, and they never met again. Although those same core pioneers who were on the board, like Craig Lee and Rob Mosley, those guys never really stopped pushing for hemp in our state. But the board itself, as a state-sponsored body, just didn't do anything. So moving forward, you know, I would say that went on for about 6 years before there was a real strong push from the grassroots. And in late 2007 and early 2008, the idea of legalizing hemp started to kind of go around these grassroots circles and grassroots organizations. One of those organizations, Take Back Kentucky, was an organization that I was a member of, and it was an issue that I took a very personal, I don't know how to say that, I took a lot of stock in this. Like I believed truly in my heart that if we allowed farmers to grow hemp in Kentucky, that we were truly going to make the world a better place. We'd be able to help people. We'd have cleaner water. We'd have better soil, all of these benefits to the ecology of the, Kentucky, and then to the environment. I saw that as being positives and things that I could really get behind. So, so I was one of the many people that worked on the issue. But it really came down, what actually kicked it off, we started talking about hemp, we started talking about legalizing it, and some of the mentors that I had were very experienced in actually passing legislation and how to effectively work with legislators and passing bills to make law. So in using their advice, we ended up connecting with my former state senator at the time. So at the time, our state senator right here in Christian County was Joey Pendleton, and he's no longer in the legislature, but that was around 2007, 2008. And so Joey came to a meeting that we had, and it was actually had nothing to do with hemp. It was a meeting that I had pulled together that was going to go over the governor's energy plan. And I had said at the beginning of the meeting that, this energy plan is, these numbers and things, it's all from the plan, except for anything that I add about hemp that should be included in this energy plan. I was already thinking our governor, the original Steve Beshear, he needs to include hemp in his energy plan. So that was the point of meeting with Joey Pendleton and our state rep, who's still our state rep, Myron Dossett. So when I mentioned that about the hemp, Joey was like, oh man, yeah, we totally need to legalize hemp. He's like, this is great. And he starts going on and on about all the wonderful things about hemp and why we should be growing it in Kentucky, and how we should have done it 20 years ago, and why have we waited this long, and do we want to be last in everything? And Myron, my state rep, was looking at Joey, our senator, like, wow, I totally didn't expect this from him. And neither did I, but Joey was so adamant in his support for the issue that we asked him to sponsor legislation to actually legalize hemp in Kentucky. So actually taking that first step of drafting a bill and then, try to get it passed. So Joey took us up on the offer. He was a really strong leader and a strong voice for that issue in the legislature. And if I remember correctly, he actually filed that bill 3 or 4 years in a row. I think maybe it was 4 years, and the first time that he filed it was in 2009. So 9, 10, 11, 12. So actually on the 4th year was when we had a different sponsor. So Joey filed that for 3 years in a row. And during that period of 3 years, we tried everything to educate people around the state. We talked to judge executives and sheriffs and legislators. We talked to people, farmers, pretty much anybody that would listen. If you will sit still for 5 minutes, I would talk to you about hemp. And and during that period, we're kind of beating the drum, I guess, and tooting the horn for hemp all over the state. And but we weren't really getting any traction. And what changed that for us was one election, honestly. We had a lot of support, but there was one election in particular that took our arguments and our movement to a totally another level. And that election was for agriculture commissioner, and it was James Comer, and he filed to run for ag commissioner. And again, my dates are never, I'm always a little hesitant to bring up dates because I don't remember numbers very well, but I think that Jamie ran for ag commissioner in 2011, and then 2012, or maybe he started in 2012. But at any rate, the date's not important. What's important is that Jamie actually came and listened to us and talked to us about industrial hemp, and there was a lot of grassroots supporters that were letting him know, here's the truth about hemp. This is all the things you can do with hemp. It's not just about smoking marijuana. It's not just about this or that. It's really about creating another avenue for our farmers. And of course, it's about property rights. So Jamie came to a statewide meeting, and we were so impressed with him because when we asked him about industrial hemp, he said, look, you support me and help me get elected and win this election, I will make industrial hemp one of the top priorities of my administration. And so, of course, the group endorsed him, and we worked really hard for him, got him elected. Now, we didn't get him elected. Jamie was very popular, and he probably would have been fine without us. But at any rate, we certainly did help and do a lot of volunteering for him. And so he gets into office, and the first thing he does is start working on the hemp issue. And I will say, I have very rarely seen an elected official who actually, keeps his campaign promises, but that was the first thing that Jamie did. He got into office. I think the first thing he actually did was audit the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, which was in desperate need of an audit at the time. But not long after that, he started pushing the hemp issue. And so we were surprised, and we were proud of him, and we were so grateful that we started working with Jamie and pushing that education. So what he did to get it started was he went back to 2001 to that old hemp commission that had been formed and created and met one time, but then never met again. So he called the chair, he contacted the chair of the commission, who was still on the board. I mean, the commission still existed. It was just dormant, it just wasn't doing anything. So he contacted the chair of the board, and he asked the chair to hold a meeting. And the chair was like, look, I'm ready to retire at this point. I'm not really looking to start a new battle for industrial hemp at this point in my life, but I'm happy to call a meeting and we'll elect you as the new chair. So that's what happened. Jamie was elected as the new chair of the commission, and he started the process of not appointing, but making suggestions and recommendations for appointments to the board. Those appointments actually came from different places. Some of them, I think there were 4 appointees that were appointed by the Senate, the Kentucky Senate, and then there was 4 that were appointed, or maybe it was 2 of each, 4 total, that were appointed by the House. There were some members that were on there by statute. They were statutory members, and what that means is that the member is a specific member. So let's say the executive director of the Governor's Office of Agriculture Policy, that is one of the members of this former board. And so it didn't matter who the executive director was, or if it changed through different administrations, whoever was the executive director had a spot on that board. And was the same for like the president of the Kentucky Sheriff's Association, the commissioner of the state police, the commissioner of agriculture. So all of those members were appointed by statute. And then there were some other members that were just picked from the riffraff, from the rabble, and I ended up being one of those members. So I was fortunate enough to have been working on this issue, and Jamie and my state rep at the time, they suggested me as a nomination, and I was one of the House appointed members of the commission. So the commission's tasks were still the same. The goal was to educate, to work on legislation, and then to eventually oversee this new hemp program that would be created in the future. And so what we ended up doing, a lot of education. So we had some funding that came in from private sources. Dr. David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's Magic Soap Company donated a big check. I don't even remember how much. It was a big one. It was worth blowing up and printing out. But he donated a large sum of money to the fund for the Industrial Hemp Commission. And then Rand Paul, our senator, his PAC, he's got like a super PAC. and his PAC actually donated a big chunk of money as well. We had some private donations, some smaller private donations come in, but everything that we did as a commission was actually done with private monies. So these were monies that were donated specifically for the cause of pushing industrial hemp and making it happen in Kentucky. So where do we go from there? So we formed the commission. We're running around the state doing education. Jamie Comer is our ag commissioner. He's extremely popular, but he also really stuck his neck out for us during that time. So while we were running around trying to get legislators to support the bill and trying to get co-sponsors and having rallies at the Capitol, having committee hearings on the legislation, it was a really, really exciting time. But I will say that I think it took its toll on Jamie, because he was raked over the coals for that. And typically in politics, you don't want to ruffle feathers, you don't want to make any waves, because if you do, I would say the old guard, the establishment, they don't really like that. They like things to be done their way and how it's always been done, kick the can down the road, yada, yada, yada. But with Jamie, he was pushing a very highly political issue and a politicized issue. I mean, this issue had been tossed around like a political football for years now. And now he was just like full speed ahead. And we're so proud of him for it. Like, I'm not saying that like that's a bad thing. But I've heard people say, Jamie steamrolled people on this hemp issue and he didn't care who he steamrolled. But the point was, he was doing the right thing. He was doing what was right by his state and by our community. And sometimes you just got to steamroll people, I guess. But so in all that, we made the effort. We got the legislators on board. At that time, in 2013, when the bill actually passed, the Republicans controlled the Senate, so we felt that we would have better luck filing a bill in the Senate with a Republican sponsor, and then kind of playing the political manipulation and all that stuff to try to get it through. So that's what happened, and we had a really it was an exciting battle. It was an exciting victory. The people who supported hemp, it was bipartisan. There was Democrats and Republicans. We had a rally where we had John Yarmouth, who was a Democrat from Louisville, and we had Rand Paul, who is our very conservative Republican senator. And then we have Thomas Massey, who's like our libertarian representative up in northern Kentucky. So we had all this support all over the state, and it just turned into a snowball. And eventually, that snowball got so big nobody could stop it. So maybe I'll pull up some of those old videos. There's some really great archived videos on our public news network, which is KET. And KET records and archives all of the old committee hearings. So we might have to dig that out, find some real good committee hearing clips from the past. But at any rate, we did it. And so in 2013, we passed a hemp bill, but it didn't mean that we were going to be able to grow hemp right away. So through the rest of 2013, what that bill did, it created a framework and a structure for a hemp program, but we still needed to have regulations. Like, how was the program going to actually work? Do you send in an application? How many acres can you grow? Who's allowed to grow hemp? What do you have to do to get approved? So all those questions had to try to be answered in the regulations. So we started working on regulations, and we spent about the next 9 months working on them, but it was pretty quickly evident that we weren't really going to make any progress on hemp if the feds didn't legalize it. So even though we had passed this bill in Kentucky, it was obvious that all this work on the regulations and trying to develop a set of regulations didn't matter if we still couldn't grow it, because the feds still have it banned. So in early 2014, after a long time of Jamie Comer and Rand Paul and all these politicians really pestering Mitch McConnell about it. They bugged him. I'm sure that he was tired of hearing about hemp by the end of 2013. And Senator McConnell, you know, he's the type of guy, he's a very powerful Republican. He's very influential. And so he actually filed an amendment to the Farm Bill. And I think that was in February maybe of 2014. It was early in the spring of 2014, I believe. And he filed that amendment, and he did that in such a way, like he knew the Farm Bill was going to pass because it always passes. And the Farm Bill is where the federal government puts in all of any agriculture projects. So it's USDA stuff, it's Farm Service Agency, like FSA stuff. Anything ag related goes into the Farm Bill, and it's usually a really massive bill with a lot of spending. So he snuck in this little tiny paragraph saying that, it would be legal for state departments of agriculture and universities to grow hemp for research projects. So once that passed, that was pretty much our go-ahead. We still didn't have any regulations in place, but since we weren't operating off of Kentucky's law, we were operating off of the federal law, and there weren't any regulations in the federal law. We just kind of moved forward, and I guess figured we'd ask for forgiveness later. And then from there, I mean, I talked about this story a little bit where we imported hemp seeds from Italy, and then the DEA hijacked it, and we had to get it back from the DEA. They stole it from customs, and all of those things led to, in the middle of summer 2014, some of the first hemp seeds were planted since World War II. The first, and I will say, there of course were hemp seeds planted before then, but as far as a legal hemp crop, the first legal, privately owned, not a government institution, not something on the black market, the first legal crops were grown right here in Kentucky in that year. We weren't the first to grow it. Murray State University planted their seeds pretty quickly. The University of Kentucky planted as soon as they got a hold of the seeds. But once we got our share of that seeds, we planted right away, and it was pretty amazing to be a part of history. So that's kind of how hemp became an issue here in Kentucky specifically. I really wanted to talk about the current state of the hemp industry and how things are going now. But I guess I spent already 30 minutes almost on just the last 20 years. So I think maybe we'll wrap this up, and if anybody's interested, maybe I'll get a podium, like the president's podium. I'll do like a state of the hemp industry, and everybody will be forced to watch it. We'll play it on every channel. It'll be awesome. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed my kind of politics and the more recent history of hemp and how we got to where we are now. Look for maybe another little update on some of that politics and how the hemp industry is going next week. However, I have some really, really exciting substitute teachers that are working on videos right now, so I almost hesitate to even tell you what's going to be next week. We will see. I'm very excited to share some of their knowledge with you, and me as well. So I'm looking forward to learning from them. Hope you've enjoyed our series. Thanks for sticking with us for 20 episodes. This has been pretty awesome. I'm getting a little teary here because I feel like this is, like season 1. We need to move on to season 2. So anyway, have a great weekend. I will see you next week, unless I don't.